Hello, come in. Oh, hi, nice to see you again. It's been a little while, what with Christmas and the New Year and so on. I'm glad you found your way here again. Still not really tidy, but I'll tell you an interesting thing. Do come and have a seat. I was wanting, as I frequently have to do, to relight my pipe. When you've got fresh, this is a very nice Kendall Black cherry, but it's quite moist. And so when it's fresh in the pipe, it often needs relighting. Anyway, speaking of relighting, it's a Sherlock Holmes Rathbone, this one. It's lovely. One of the earliest, in fact, the earliest Sherlock Holmes pipe that I got. So, the other day I was in just this situation, wanting to relight. And I thought, oh, I've got matches. I can't find my lighter, I'll use matches. And I picked up the matchbox and suddenly remembered, in fact, this was no ordinary matchbox. In fact, it was a lovely present. I have to do this from my friend Philippa. Now let me show this to you. Look, little matchbox, and you think, oh, it's got a lovely bird and all the herbs, and then it says, strangely, original illustrations by Jackie Duckworth. That's a bit odd. And you open it up, and it's a poem. And it's no ordinary poem. It's one of my all-time favourite poems. Look, it says, Adlestrop by Edward Thomas. And there on one side of it, in the beautiful lettering that they used to use for railway stops, Adlestrop. And on the other side, the poem. So I thought I'd read you the poem. You may know it. It is perhaps Edward Thomas's most famous poem. Thomas was a very fine poet of the late 19th, early 20th century. We'd think of him now as a poet, but he began to make his mark. He was originally Welsh. He went up to Oxford in the early 1900s. He chose a literary life, and he was at first a book reviewer, and then he began to write really lucid, beautiful prose pieces of observation of nature and times and people and short story. He wrote a very short novel. So he was an author of that kind of high literary, beautifully observed nature writing. But to his good fortune, and indeed I would reckon Robert Frost's good fortune, the American poet Robert Frost came out and moved into a village for a while not far from where Thomas was living. And Frost, reading Thomas's prose, actually said, do you know, I think you're actually a poet. I think, as it were, nestling inside the thickets of your prose are much more slender and elegant and understated poems waiting to come out. And he and Robert Frost went on long walks together, and Frost noticed that Edward Thomas could never quite make up his mind about which path to take, which road to take, on the paths, on the walks, but actually sometimes in life as well. And of course Frost was gently trying to nudge him into the more precarious path of being a poet rather than a jobbing prose writer. Anyway, Frost had to go back to America, but he sent him, in advance of its publication anywhere else, he sent him what is now one of Frost's most famous poems, The Road Not Taken, about stopping by the snowy woods in the evening and this question of which path. And that had unforeseen consequences for Thomas, in some ways wonderful and beautiful, and in other ways tragic, because by this time we were moving into the vicissitudes of the 20th century, and the First World War had begun. And Thomas was hesitating both on the fork of the road between prose and poetry, but also he was old enough not to have been immediately called up. But, you know, the rate of attrition and death in the war was terrible, and he began to wonder whether it was incumbent upon him to enlist. And he kind of made those choices together, both the difficult path of poetry and the, as it turned, tragic and fatal path into the war. Anyway, in 1914, when the war was just unrolling and Thomas was still wrestling with this question, on the 24th of June, he was taking an express train, and obviously an express train doesn't normally stop at tiny little places, but strangely, and for no apparent reason, I mean, it may have been to do with troop movements or pauses or changes in the timetable, whatever it was, the train stopped at this little Gloucestershire station with the wonderful name of Adlestrop. And Thomas wrote this poem about it. And it's, in a sense, I mean, the poignancy is that afterwards he went and joined up, and then a few years later, in 1917, he was killed in action. And the poem hadn't yet been published, and the poem was due to be published just at the, you know, it was going to be the, you know, really confirming his career as a poet. It's a whole volume of poetry that he'd written. And in the end, it was published posthumously. It was published a week or two, the whole book, after he died. But the poem itself was published in the New Statesman very shortly after he died. And although it's not traditionally a war poem, it's not about war at all. It's the most exquisite celebration of Englishness, of the sheer sound and name and beauty of the English countryside. But it became hugely celebrated because, in a sense, it was what Thomas believed he was dying for. Anyway, I've said enough about it. Let me just read it to you. I think it's well, I remember somebody once saying, occasionally you get a golden poem by a silver poet. Perhaps I think Thomas is more than a silver poet, but this is certainly a golden poem. Adlestrop by Edward Thomas. Yes, I remember Adlestrop, the name, because one afternoon of heat the express train drew up there unwontedly. It was late June. The steam hissed. Someone cleared his throat. No one left, and no one came on the bare platform. What I saw was Adlestrop, only the name, and willows, willow herb, and grass, and meadow sweet, and haycocks dry, no whit less still and lonely fair than the high cloudlets in the sky. And for that minute, a blackbird sang close by, and round him, mistier, further and further, all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. Oh, it's the power of a poem to distill just one moment, just completely. It's incredibly elegantly written. If you were to look at the text again, you'd see it's very delicately rhymed. It feels almost like a prose poem, but it's actually got this lovely, gentle rhythm, and it's rhymed A, B, C, B. So it's just in each quatrain a pair of lines rhyming. And it's so beautiful because you get the moment, you get the stillness, you've got the steam train, you've got the silence, and then it appears to end. It says, no one left, no one came on the bare platform. What I saw was Adlestrop. Only the name. Could have ended there. And then you just get this new stanza. And willows, willow herb, and grass. You get the sense of the meadows. It just goes out. And for a moment, he's dwelling and indwelling and expressing, outwardly expressing for us, the whole of England. The kind of, not only the beauty of the sound of the bird and all the birds, but the names, Adlestrop and then Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, the sheer sound. So it became much anthologized, and it became for many people a celebration that something that they'd wordlessly felt and instinctively loved. So much so that in June, on June the 24th, 2014, 100 years later, there was a special train with a steam engine and everything set up to travel from Oxford to Moreton in the Marsh, and 200 passengers got on it. And it stopped. There was no longer a station even at Adlestrop, but it stopped where the station was, and there was still the name, Adlestrop. And somebody stood in the on the train and read the poem. And you think about that, the power of the language, the insights of this one man on a still train on a hot June day with the steam hissing and nobody moving, putting pen to paper and preserving something for everybody over 100 years, and then going out from that, into the carnage of the Somme, but leaving behind in this astonishing poem. I love the way it's been done here with the name, Adlestrop. You can see why the name was so important. And I love the way it folds and unfolds out of the matchbox. I think it's a beautiful thing, not least because there's a sense in which this is almost a kind of outward invisible expression of the poem. It's a little thing folded of words, but over the centuries it's kind of unfolded and gone out. And indeed, the focus on the miniatureness, if you like, of the train and the platform at the end of the poem folds out to all the birds of Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, like this unfolding. So I'm very glad that my friend Philippa gave me this, and very glad that we'll put it back in its lair. There's the blackbird singing, and there's the willow and the willow herb. It was a stroke of genius, I think, on the part of Jackie Duckworth to choose this poem and make it in that format, and I'm very glad that my friend Philippa sent it to me. I'm spilling my coffee. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for dropping by.